Welcome to Risk Engineers Talk Governance. In this episode, due diligence engineers Richard Robinson and Gaye Francis discuss the application of due diligence within the marine pilotage industry. We hope you enjoy the chat. If you do, please give us a rating and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. If you'd like any more information on R2A's work or have any feedback or topic ideas, head to r2a.com.au.
Hi Richard, welcome to another podcast session.
Good morning, Gaye.
We thought we'd focus on marine pilotage today because we were going to, during this season, we were going to cover some of the industries that we do some work in. So you're actually giving a presentation next week in New Zealand, in Christchurch, to the New Zealand Marine Pilots Association.
Indeed.
And we've done this on a number of occasions and for a number of courses both in Australia and New Zealand. So I guess, do you want to sort of have a quick run through your presentation and then what you're going to cover in your presentation?
Well, it hasn't been totally confirmed yet, but I'm following Antonio Delito, who's an Australian-Italian, and I suspect he's going to be talking about the incident of the Jolly Nero that took out the control tower in Genoa, and 7 people got killed. Now, that was about 6 years ago now, I think it is, and as a consequence of all these deaths, and it was a litany of disasters and confusion and things that went wrong between the marine pilot and the ship's engineers and the captain, in part because certain bits of equipment weren't working, i.e. the engine rev counter wasn't working, so the pilot didn't realise quickly enough they were relying on voice messages between the engine room and the captain as to where the actual state of the engines were. But anyway, the control tower got took out. And strangely enough, the Italian courts adopted this notion of due diligence, which I didn't think was a civil law, European type Roman law, Napoleonic law concept, which I thought was a peculiarly common law, English-speaking world idea. But they applied it. And as a consequence, they put the captain away, the chief engineer away. They tried to put the marine pilot away, but he got off on appeal. And now they're having a crack at the engineer who put the control tower on the point, such that if a ship
did fail in any way,
it could be taken out. And I don't actually know where that's gone. I'm sure Antonio will give us an update. But I was going to explain the due diligence aspects of that. Now, we've been through this before and for numerous things, and we've explained it with regards to the Lake Illawarra and the incident at taking out the Hobart Bridge. And you might recall the Costco Busan, which hit the Golden Gate Bridge. See, marine pilots have a lot of protections under civil law, but when something bad happens, there's an increasing tendency. We sort of talked about blame culture, which has popped up this decade in particular. When something goes wrong,
whose fault was it?
Yeah, whose fault was it? Well, in that particular instance, despite all the sort of legal protections that the marine pilot in San Francisco had, they put him away under environmental legislation for coating birds with oil. So there's always something can come out and get you. If they want to get you, they'll come and get you these days.
There's a whole lot of different legislations that apply.
And it'll be interesting to see. You remember the Boston Bridge got taken out by a ship that went blacked out? And the question was, why didn't it have a tug? Because that's the whole point of having tugs. If you know there's something you can take out, you have a tug tied fast astern so that you can be steered out of the way with the momentum of the ship. So because when it blacked out, there's nothing they can do. The ship's going to go wherever the ship's pointed, or whatever the circumstance, the current, the wind and everything else just pushes you to, that's where you're going to go until you just stall. Or you dropped your anchor and come to a grinding halt or whatever you've done. But you don't have any choices. And so all this sort of stuff is basically reappearing, and the job is to make sure that for all the critical scenarios, you've got measures in place so that really bad things don't happen, such as hitting the Golden Gate Bridge or taking out the bridge in Boston, or taking out the control tower in Genoa.
And I think that's some of the feedback from the marine pilots when we've done jobs for them is by using the due diligence approach, it actually allows them to get additional resources and the things that they need in place to make the passage safe. Because the things that they are dealing with are high consequence, very, very low likelihood events. And when they were used to do it on a risk basis, it never got over the line.
Because you discount the high consequence things by the unlikeliness event. But you might recall when we had those discussion with the world's largest port of Port Hedland,
Yes.
And they did the N-1. We're just borrowing an idea that from the electrical industry. The electrical industry basically says that for any network, you should be able to have a major conductor should fail and the system should ignore it. It should just be able to keep going. But we've noticed, because of commercial pressures, the headroom is getting tighter and tighter, and I don't think a lot of networks do have N-1 anymore. But when we talk about that with regards to ships, because we listened to them for about a morning, I think it was, Marine Pilotage talking about it.
Yes.
And we just sort of said, hang on a minute, you need an N-1 argument so that, if the engine of the ship fails or one of your tug fails, you've still got a way to bring whatever the situation is home safely. And once they did that, they instantly got another tug applied. That obviously bolted off to I suspect the boards of the large mining companies that use that port. And the idea that you could block a channel with a ship, which is now Australia, it's the world's largest by tonnage, I believe, port.
Okay.
What would happen to Australia if you blocked that port and you had to cut the ship up for 6 months? It just doesn't bear thinking about.
And I think that's what it is. It's the high consequence, as you said. It's not just that; it's the recovery time as well, and being able to block a channel in a port so it can't be used for a long period of time was unacceptable.
You might remember when the Iron Barron hit Hebe Reef in Bass Strait. The harbour master wouldn't let be dragged into Devonport just in case it sunk in the channel and just blocked up the ferry service from between Tasmania and Australia. Because if you do that, it becomes impossible for. I think 1/3 of all of New Zealand's exports and imports go through via the ferry, by Devonport.
So again, criticality argument, and that's how it's been applied to marine pilotage. And I think one of the interesting things, and it's being extended to the port scenario now, so pilotage is one aspect of port operations, and an important aspect. And so we've done a number of pilotage reviews for a number of ports around Australia.
You've got to remember to think about a marine pilot, that the whole point about having a marine pilot is it's for the critical, don't collide, allied or ground a ship. Okay, it's always critical. That's the only reason why the marine pilot's there.
Well, it's sort of interesting. They're almost the control in a way, aren't they? So they've got to have the tools available to them to make sure that they're an effective control.
Correct.
And so some of the controls that we do put in place to make sure that they've got the right information and, additional tug services or assistance and that sort of stuff is all the things that they need to do their job effectively.
Correct.
What I was going to say, though, is that that sort of idea is now being expanded out into the whole of port scenario. So it's not just being considered for ships being brought in and out, it's actually for the port operations as a whole.
You tried to describe the recent job we did for Tasports, are you?
Yes, well, we have done it there, but we've done it at other ports as well. But I think one of that integrated approach, and we sort of touched on it in one of our other previous podcasts in this session, is that integrated approach and not looking at some of the activities in silos will give you a different set of precautions than you would if you just did it in silos.
Well, that was what we did. One of the Tasports ports, remember, they had a whole lot of industry around. And when you looked at the emergency services that those industry had available to them, and they were more than willing to help and share and provide their emergency services to the port as a whole, and not just for their own purposes.
Yeah.
And as long as you had a sort of a mutual aid process, everyone's. But the advantage of that was that particular port, therefore, had more resources than most other ports already available to it.
So by looking at what you could bring in and the controls that you could put in place to address the issues, all of a sudden you've got a step level improvement in safety that you might not necessarily have got.
Well, remember, there were 2 Australian subs that turned up in port. Duchesneau and Rankin turned up, and you don't normally see 2 Australian subs in one place.
It was pretty exciting, wasn't it?
We've only got a few of them, and only some of them 6, and only 4 probably operational at any given time. The rest are always being worked up and fitted out, refitted and things like that. To see 2 of them in one place at once is quite remarkable.
I'm not sure how to look at the safety due diligence of the port, but considering that all the activities that have to be considered.
That's correct, remember there was an ill sailor that had to get off.
That's right.
And the port actually used the collective resources to actually make it a success.
Okay. You forgot to put that bit in, and I had forgotten that little bit. So our process is no different for pilotage due diligence reviews than any other due diligence review that we do. So we need to have an argument as to why all the credible critical issues have been identified.
Yep.
And in a port, we typically look at all the user groups who are using there and what activities they're doing. So there's sort of a activities table that you do.
It's like the Twilight Regattas in Hobart. There's all these kids in dinghies running around. You better make sure the big ship
Doesn't
in
go
emergency doesn't run over some...
Yeah. You then got to look at all the controls that you can put in place, which are reasonable in the circumstances. And then, as I said, you always have a quality assurance system to make sure that the things that you are going to put in place are sustained and managed accordingly. But there will be site-specific or port-specific issues. Like Richard said, the regattas in Hobart were a particular issue. There's more industry in Bell Bay and in Port Hedland, for example. There's different weather conditions depending on whether you're on the east coast or the west coast of Australia. So there's different issues and slight variations in each of the ports, and the controls that you'll put in place may be different.
Indeed. And... well, you do the best with what you have available to you. Now, obviously, if you can't get there, then you're going to have to do some extra things. But an awful lot of the time, and that's certainly, we've talked about Taupo and other things like that, competent people do competent things. And so if you've got competent people around, they'll be providing services, even if you're not aware that that's available to you. And a lot of the time, well, in fact, in all the ports ones we did, we got all the users together. Remember, that was the whole point of the exercise. It's hard to do this stuff in isolation and just have a single expert come in and get it right when you've got multiple potential users and multiple potential resources.
And I think that was the key thing that came out of it, wasn't it? That there were more resources available than was known by any one party.
Correct.
That all of a sudden was, if you adopted it collectively for the port use overall, then you got that improvement. So unless I guess that's a summary of what we're going to talk about at the conference next week. So good luck with your presentation, Richard, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.